and welcome to another roundtable conversation here with David Zuckerman, Lieutenant Governor. And today we're focusing on Rutland County. Rutland is of course, Vermont's a small state, but each county has its own strengths and challenges. And I'm looking forward to having an in-depth focus on how COVID-19 has impacted Rutland County. What are some ideas that could come out of your experiences in Rutland County? And my guests here and have a really wide breadth of experience of what's happening in Rutland County and maybe some ideas on how we can rebuild the economy as we work through to the other side of COVID. While we're trying to work our way through it, we need to be planning for getting out the other side. Today, joining me for this conversation are Josh Eckler. He's co-owner of the Trailside Inn in Killington, Senator Cheryl Hooker from Rutland County, Caprice Hover, the executive director of the United Way of Rutland County, Judy Robinson, a professor of economics at Castleton University, and Kimberley Rupe, the president of Rutland Young Professionals. So a really nice breadth of perspectives. I just want to say welcome. Hello, everybody.
Hi.
Great. Before we get started, I just want to remind those who are watching that participation in this conversation does not constitute an endorsement. We are using these roundtables as opportunities to have great discussions with people from around the state, around their experience and expertise, and as a way to get out to you all. We'd like to hear your thoughts and ideas. So if you are watching this, please share them, share your thoughts in the comments section, and we'll try to bring them in to the conversation. If not, we'll try to be able to at least follow up with you with a response to your thoughts or questions and ideas. Ideas are always welcome. As I mentioned earlier, COVID-19 has had a huge impact on every sector of our state. It's being felt by every Vermonter in some way. We're going to start by getting a quick couple 1-minute feel for how some of the issues facing Rutland County as a result of COVID-19. I'm going to start with Caprice. You are working with a lot of people facing a lot of challenges, and maybe you can share what you're seeing at United Way of Rutland County and what services are in the highest demand right now.
Absolutely. I think as far as how it affected the agencies we serve, the reality is I think the expression of flying a plane with no instructions was exactly what I felt March 13th when we got the notification that we would be helping the Emergency Operations Center, addressing housing, food insecurities, a wide range of things. And it can be frustrating at times because no one has the answers and you're trying to come up with solutions for challenges. Our immediate challenges were the housing challenges around our community. The state did the right thing. I've been a housing advocate for a very long time and have always said that there is this hidden homeless challenge that we can't get our arms around. So I think the first thing we noticed is in our community seeing the number of homeless go from 35 to 50 a week to 260 situations in a couple weeks. You know, the first week we were planning for an additional 50. By the end of that week, we were planning for an additional 200. So housing became an immediate challenge. And right behind that, of course, was the food challenges. So we jumped in very quickly. In essence, what United Way had to do is we really literally shifted our entire focus. We were one of the ones that did decide to continue with our grant process because we felt it was critical. The organizations needed this money over the next year. The number two thing we decided was not to do COVID fundraising because we knew that other organizations were going to be doing that and we did not want to compete with that. We wanted to identify gaps in services where the donations we had could be most effective. And the thing I love about United Way is I'm not funded by grants or federal or state grants. So when I identify a need, I just got to say, board, I want to do this, and we do it. And the need we found within week 2 was the personal protective equipment. There was nobody that could get their hands on gloves, on masks, on sanitation. So United Way actually had the ability and the connection because of United Way Worldwide to be able to get out personal protective equipment within 2 weeks of the situation to Genesis Healthcare, VNA, to a lot of organizations that weren't going to end up having that access right off the bat anyway. So you know, you're flying by the seat of your pants trying to develop COVID housing that's going to address folks that are non-ambulatory, folks that are pre-COVID, and then folks that are in the COVID. So it was a whirlwind, and
Wow.
I think I was appreciative to have the hospital was a huge partner with the United Way to try and address these challenges across the board. So as of right now, the top priorities, again, are now how do we take the folks that are homeless and move them into some permanent or bridge housing. That is a place we've worked very hard on. We're actually getting ready because we do believe there's going to be a second wave to make sure that we have enough protective equipment in advance for some of the organizations that don't necessarily, I call them the little guys, like the town administrators, the town food shelves. So that's our
Yeah.
next phase is
We'll,
doing
we'll come back to some of these things. We could probably do a whole program on everything you just brought up, which is really emblematic of how massive the challenges are that are out there. Thank you. Kimberly, and I don't know if you go by Kim sometimes, let me know, but can you share some of the impact that you personally have experienced or that you've seen and heard among young professionals in Rutland County? You know, is it broadband? Is it your jobs? What's going on there?
Absolutely, thank you. So two main things come to mind here for the impact on young professionals. And the first one being isolation and the impacts of mental health. And I think that hits everybody a little bit. But I mean, I look specifically at Rutland Young Professionals. We're an organization that thrives on networking and professional development. And these last few months, we've not been able to have our typical gatherings, creating some serious isolation challenges for this demographic, along with many others, especially when we also do a lot of work in welcoming new young individuals and families to our region who are considering moving here. Mental health is incredibly important to keep in mind right now. And my second thought, of course, is for our young business owners who are just starting out. I know a business specifically in Rutland County that has young owners, and at the start of COVID-19, they hadn't even been open a year and were forced to make some serious changes, resulting in some substantial losses in their business. They hadn't been open long enough to take advantage of the SBA funds and are so young in their career and building their business that the savings just weren't there. And this is just, you know, one example of one business in Rutland County. And, you know, there's so many young professionals that are just starting out with their businesses, and they've seen a huge hit. You know, obviously every business has been impacted one way or another, but these folks that don't have that savings to have that cushion, it's a huge hit.
Yeah. Oh, sorry to hear that. And thank you. Josh, you know, we were just talking about economy with Kimberly and some of the small businesses. You're up in the Killington area. The tourist industry is huge. We could probably do another show on this whole arena. But can you share a little bit about how your inn has been impacted by the lack of tourists, how based your business is and so many up in your area?
Sure. So we own the Trailside Inn up in Killington. During the winter, we host skiers and some corporate groups and stuff like that. We were obviously very abruptly shut down back in mid-late March, where we lost about a month's worth of ski business. From there, in the summers, we actually are a wedding venue and host private events throughout the entire summer. We had 15 weddings on site. We're down to 14. We were also accommodations for another couple of venues that are off site. Our weddings are kind of our business. They drive us. You know, they probably accommodate about 60% of our overall revenue. We're down to one wedding. You know, there's ACCD has come out away with quarantine requirements, who can travel to the state and everything else. What's been really difficult for us is that there's not a lack of planning and forecasting as to what is going to be held 30 days, 60 days from now. And, you know, we spent all of April, May, and the first part of June trying to talk our wedding couples off the cliff because they were nervous, they wanted to plan, they wanted to figure out things, but eventually we did have to go ahead and cancel those events. We did try to open in July just for random travelers and all that kind of stuff. We opened a bunch of availability and we didn't get any inquiries. The phone was not ringing. Since then, we did open last weekend. We have filled some rooms here and there, you know, but we're expecting to do maybe 15% if we're lucky, which is still a loss of a month. It's slowing the bleeding down, but it's not, it's definitely not covering our bills, our mortgage and stuff like that. You know, being a business that is based in low cost of goods, we're not buying lots of food every weekend for a restaurant, right? That we have these huge monthly burdens. And that's what's really difficult for us, because our burn rate, even though we don't have a lot of employees and all that kind of stuff, is really huge. So we have gotten PPP, we have gotten grant money and stuff like that, but we really got to figure out how to return to business and actually get people here. We're just one of a dozen wedding venues in the area. You know, in the greater Killington area, there's probably 2,000 to 2,500 people that come to the area for weddings alone. And that's a lack of going to Long Trail Brewery for lunch. That's not filling up your coolers and your gas tank, you know, before you go home. That's all the catering companies, that's the local florists, that's the photographers. You know, we estimate just our weddings on site alone bring about $800,000 to this local area, and that's all gone. So, you know, our focus and my main issue, you know, with business has been, how do we get back to hosting events? How do we get back to hosting people here in a safe way that makes sense?
Yeah, thank you. And Josh, wow, every one of these stories, and unfortunately, you're not the only one. It's happening all over. And as you said, you've got businesses all around you facing the same issues. So I apologize for that. Judy, you have the lens of Castleton University. You can look at it in economic terms from the issues around students or not and the impact that they have in your area, but also you're an economics professor, I believe. And so what are some of the economic impacts that you're seeing, and how does the impacts of remote learning at Castleton going to trickle into the greater Rutland County economy?
Okay, well, first of all, I want to talk about what happened last spring and then what we're anticipating happening going forward.
Okay, in just a couple minutes. Yeah.
Yeah, I know. Last spring, it was, you know, boom, we're closing down. And that meant everybody left town. And I'm sure, I don't have any numbers for the impact on the town of Castleton, but we have a ton of students who rent apartments in town and who buy their food and groceries in town. And then all of our students, one way or another, are buying things either in the town of Castleton or over in Rutland itself. So it was a pretty drastic impact on the community. But the biggest impact, I suspect, was on the university itself, because all of those students who had contracts for meals and housing, all of a sudden now were owed refunds. And that came to thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars, and that hit the rest of the VSC as well. The consequence is now the state legislature is putting in some money short-term to take care of that. But the VSC has had some long-term problems for a long time. We've been probably the worst funded in the country as far as state support. And I'm hoping now that there'll be some improvements in that. Now, going forward, Castleton is doing something that at first glance sounded weird, but it's sort of making some sense. Almost all the classes will be online, but the campus will be open. The dorms will be habitated. The dining commons is going to be operating. The library will be operating, etc. So we expect to have something like half of the normal number of people that would be living on campus. We're not going to allow that because you can't, because they have to have so many rules for social distancing that they're cutting way down the number of people who will be on campus. But nevertheless, there will be people on campus. And we think that that will mitigate a lot of the impact on the community, as well as the financial impact on the school itself. So it's an interesting experiment. They're working like crazy to make it safe. But they've also said that if the situation in the state deteriorates sufficiently, boom, we'll close down. So they're ready to close down on a dime if they have to. So that's the situation.
It's an incredibly hard balance to figure out how to open schools. I know the K through 12 system is really struggling with that as well.
Yeah, I think it's actually worse for K-12 because it's little kids.
Right.
I did see a video that somebody in the dining commons put out explaining all the things they're doing, and I'm pretty impressed with all the changes they're making. So hopefully it'll be okay.
Well, thank you, Judy. And we're going to wrap this opening part with Senator Cheryl Hooker. I asked you to go last because, of course, you are hearing from all of these people and many more about the struggles they're facing You know some of the work that's been done in the legislature to try to help, but of course, the resources are so slim compared to the need that's out there. So can you share some of what you've seen or heard that beyond even what we've just heard here?
Well, obviously, thank you for being here, first of all. And obviously, the pandemic is front and center for all of us. But the issues that we're hearing about have been issues that have been percolating for a long time, and they're sort of coming to the forefront now. And we're really focusing on them. You've heard about, the school situation. You've heard about the small business situation. You've heard about the housing situation. All of these things have been problems that certainly I've heard about and my colleagues have heard about. Broadband, another issue that we really need to focus on, especially if we're going to be changing to remote learning and certainly telemedicine and all of those things that go along with it. But one thing that I'd like to focus on that all of us in Rutland County can have a part in, all of us in Vermont. I just got a report from the census person in Rutland yesterday saying that Vermont is the 47th in the nation for filing for the census forms. Rutland County is 6th in Vermont for filing the census forms. This is something that we can all do. It's easy, it's free, it's very important because it will determine how many resources we get from the federal government for the next 10 years. So, to say that things are bad is an understatement, and that we'll be looking at reduced revenues for heaven knows how long. But this is just something very simple that we can do to help this situation. So I don't know, how we solve these problems. We certainly don't solve them overnight. I know that Caprice and others are working really hard on the housing issue, and I'm hoping that that's going to help. I know that Josh, some of the things I hope, Josh, you mentioned the ski season. We know how important that is in this area, and we need to be able to bring people in a safe way. So with luck, we will be able to do that. I'm not sure what the answer is, but we'll certainly work on helping as much as we can from the state perspective. But again, the resources need to be there. We need to talk to our delegation in Washington. They're always behind us anyway, but to make sure that Congress is doing what it needs to do to help the states, and in turn the states that can then help the municipalities.
Yeah, we could have had an hour-long conversation with each of you singularly, much less all of you. So I'm sorry for the tightness of it all. I want to start with all of that information and those specific challenges. And obviously we're hearing about the interconnected nature of some of these. I want to go a little deeper into jobs, because I think ultimately jobs and employers are sort of the backbone of a lot of what's going on to then help people pay for housing and pay for food and opportunities. So Josh, you were really clear about the huge impact from the lack of tourism and what kind of trickle around impacts that has. You talked about local restaurants and gas stations and stores, hotels, restaurants, you name it. Kimberley, I was really interested in hearing a bit about some of the interconnectedness of the startup business folks and the mental health issues when you're just starting a business. I started my farm 20 odd years ago. Josh, I don't know when you got involved in that business or started that business, but the stress of just operating a business is enough as it is. When you're starting it, incredibly harder. And those little details like not able to get the SBA EIDL loan if you're a brand new business was really interesting. So what do either of you two, and then maybe we'll jump to others, what do you think is needed to safely restart the economy? And for those that can't restart at this time, what ways do you see possibly using the employees, the space, or the specific skill set? I just started thinking about as I was rereading this question, schools need space. Josh, you're underutilized. What if schools spread out into more areas so that there are fewer concentrations of kids? I have no idea. That literally just came to the top of my head. I don't know. And if they rented some space, who knows? What are some ideas that you all could throw out there, and anybody watching on Facebook, throw them in the comments section, because I think we're all looking as policymakers and as businesses for ways to use our resources creatively. So
Sure. So if you want, I'll go first. So
Sure.
there's two major things that I see that we need to do to restart the economy, at least for my world, right? We need to start forecasting better as to what businesses can do in the future. The ACCD and the way that they've released new information, they release on a Wednesday or Thursday that restaurants can open to outdoor seating on Friday. Well, they haven't thought about the fact that these restaurants have been shut down for multiple months and they probably don't have their coolers filled, right? You know, for us planning events, you know, how are we supposed to plan an event 2 months from now? You know, we've tried to pivot and host micro weddings. You know, that's a whole new hot word. But unfortunately, all but one of our couples this summer was from out of state. So we can't even host a 25-person wedding right now because of the quarantine requirements. So we have tried to pivot and do those sort of things. So being able to forecast and say what's going to open in a month or what we're trying to work towards, other states have done that. Rhode Island, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, Maine, some states out west have done that with their events and all that. And the big thing for us now, you know, I was very vocal a couple months ago. Cheryl and I became good friends about not losing wedding season. I'm really worried about losing ski season. And we need to come up with some sort of rules because we're going to start getting bookings soon. And if we can only operate at 50%, I need to figure out how that math works and what I need to charge to be able to cover our costs every month, right? To make sure that we can limp along until the light switch really goes back on. So forecasting is the major thing for us.
Yeah.
Second item is what is the quarantine requirements? And ACCD, for everybody out there is watching, go to the ACCD websites, click on the cross travel information. There's quarantine requirements. There's a map, and it's basically Virginia North and Ohio East. When you look at it, there's only certain counties that we can host people from. That map, when they first announced it back in June, had about 20% of the population could actually come to Vermont. Now we're down to less than 8%. It's getting smaller and smaller. It basically allows people from rural Maine to come visit Vermont. Rural Maine is more than likely happy where rural Maine is right now. They're probably not going to come vacation in Vermont, to be all realistic about it, right? A lot of that data behind that map isn't accurate. There'll be an outbreak in my parents' home county back in New York in a nursing home that drives them up and shows that they're just as bad as New York City when it's 2 contained outbreaks within a nursing home. So we're over restricting travel here. I want to do this safely, but I want it to be consistently. So they got to figure out who can come here, how they can come here, because ski season is going to be lost under the current map. Boston, New York, all these places that come visit Killington, which we believe is the best ski resort in the East Coast, is not going to come here because they can't. And you know what? Colorado is opening for business. Their ski resorts are booming right now, and they plan on opening for skiing. And all these people are going to look at Vermont and say, I can't come there. They're going to plan their trip out west instead. And we're only going to dig Vermont further into the hole.
Does anybody else want to jump in on creative ideas and or information that will help? Kim?
Jump in.
Yeah.
I would completely agree with Josh on forecasting and how incredibly helpful that would be. But I personally always like to look at what we as a community can do differently together and how we can improve the situation. Continue to wear your mask, practice social distancing, follow recommendations by CDC. At the end of the day, you know, some of these situations can, you know, other people have had some conflicting opinions on that, but the way I try to put that and reflect that on others is by doing these things, you're helping your local businesses and allowing them to reopen. I also think it's important to recognize the creativity of our businesses these last few months and continue to encourage individuals to think outside the box and what works best for your businesses and your community. I like to use the Paramount Theater as an example, who obviously couldn't open and now have done 2 drive-in theaters in Rutland, and I am unable to buy tickets almost every time because they're going so fast. So I think as a community, you know, share your ideas. If you have an idea for 1 or 2 of your favorite businesses on things that they could be doing differently, I'm sure that they would be more than willing to open up and you know, have a conversation with you about your ideas with open arms. We are all in this together. We are here for each other, and to just continue thinking out the box and share your ideas and help one another, I think that's the best thing we can do. And wear your mask.
Yeah, I heard on the radio today that if everyone wore masks in this country, that the likely number of deaths over the next period of time could be cut in half, and how much more quickly our businesses would be able to reopen, our social activities would be able to be at least somewhat more normalized. So I appreciate your comment on the masks, Kim. Does anybody else want to throw in a quick thought on this? If not, I'm going to move to the next one since we were a little long at the beginning. All right. We have education conversations all across the state, from keeping our state colleges open, which was obviously a huge issue at about the same time as COVID hit. The legislature did put forth about $30 million to keep Northern Vermont University and Vermont Technical College able to stay open and then be planning for a more robust future. Otherwise, there had been no money put in the governor's budget with the CARES money to do that. Castleton had been spared the axe during that process. It's been doing really well, but and Castleton is a real beacon of hope, I think, for a lot of people in terms of after they finish high school, a chance to get a higher education degree at a more reasonable cost. It's not as low cost as we'd all like state colleges to be, but it is a beacon of hope for many Vermonters who can't leave the state to further their education. Maybe they'll see a bump of in-state folks interested. You're really well known for your nursing and education programs. Obviously, as said earlier, the students are part of the local economy, both as employees and as consumers. So this could be for multiple people. It doesn't just have to be for Judy to start, but what do you think the impact will be with Castleton University operating only online for the fall? How will that impact the whole county? I mean, there's a lot of non-residential students from the area, but if the out-of-state students or other parts of Vermont students don't make it down, what's that impact going to be? And Judy, I'd like to start with you, but maybe go to Cheryl after that.
Okay. Actually, I've been quite surprised that we haven't lost as many students as we thought we were going to. We were afraid that because of going online when other universities aren't, that we would lose a lot of students. And it turns out we did lose some, but we also gained some of people whose homeschool is in person and they don't like that and they want a place where its classes are online. So the result is that our enrollment's gone down a little bit, but not nearly as much as we thought it might. And so that's sort of the good news. The other piece is because we're keeping the campus open, we expect that we'll have, as I said, about half of our normal number of people living on campus. Now, I don't know how much we'll see in terms of students coming and living off campus, because there's a whole bunch of students who rent houses and apartments in the community. I don't know how much of that will continue, but I suspect some of it will, even though 99% of the classes are online. Nevertheless, they're trying to have some events that they can do in such a way that is safe. So there's a lot of creative thinking going on about how to reduce some of the negative impacts. That said, Castleton, like all the other VSC schools, are so severely underfunded by the state that it really limits what we can do. And it occurs to me that that's very short-sighted, because we know that we need a very small percentage of high school graduates in Vermont actually go on for higher ed. And to the extent that we reverse that, I think that would actually be a big shot in the arm for the economy as a whole. If more students were getting trained in the various areas that they might want to do. And when I was teaching in a classroom, I would look around and I'd see the empty seats and think, we could actually have a lot more students in this class. And yet there's a lot of bright young high school graduates who aren't going to college, and it's mostly because they don't have the financial wherewithal, or they think they don't. And so it seems to me that the legislature, I know how tight it is, and I realize that we're only 800,000 people and we're trying to do a heck of a lot. Nevertheless, I think that it would be an extremely good investment if there was some more money put into the VSC system. I think it would definitely improve the economy, even now, even with COVID. So that's the resource we need, frankly, because even though you talk about it being a low-cost education, if you look at in-state tuition for almost every other state in the country, they have some universities and schools that are way, way lower tuition than ours. And the reason our tuition is so high is because the state you know, we're called a state school, and yet something like, I think the last I heard was something like 12% of our costs are actually covered by the state. The rest is covered by student tuition. Okay, and that's
Right.
high. So that would, I mean, that to me seems to be the ongoing issue as far as higher ed in Vermont. Yes, we're cheaper than obviously the private schools or even UVM, but we're not really where we are.
Senator Hooker.
I just wanted to talk a little bit about the impact of not having as many kids coming. For the past several years, we've had dorms in Rutland City from
Right.
Castleton, and it's made a huge difference. It's just nice to see more young people out and about and, in the city, and I'm afraid that, you know, that's going to have an impact. We've lost 2 other colleges in this area in the past, you know, year and a half or so, and we've seen the devastating effect that that's had, and so to add to that is going to be another hit for us. But I'm glad to hear that the enrollment is pretty stable at Castleton, and this is good news.
Yeah, and I don't know if Caprice, you want to throw a word in on how do young people impact the work that you're doing from volunteering or other ways?
I think that's one of the things I wanted to hit on is another area where the nonprofit organizations are going to get hurt on this is there's a lot of social capital that we've appreciated over the years with the local colleges. We lost 2 colleges and now the colleges are going online. So that social capital and internship work that may have been happening, the volunteers that allow us to feed some people, help with food shelves, that's I think going to be a challenge social capital wise. The second thing for the Rutland County area is we have a huge early education challenge, and Castleton University had just literally been granted and started receiving money to finally get an early education center in the western part of our county that utilized students in teaching, and it was such a phenomenal model of how we could really, and let's face it, you can't go back to work if you don't have early education. Like, this is a challenge for people returning to work. So I think it's critical to figure out how do we address these resources that the colleges bring to us, and especially when we're losing them, now how do we give students real opportunities to explore their world where they want to work in the future, at the same time as helping social capitally with the agencies that rely very heavily on this.
Well, actually, your point about education, both early education, and then I'm going to roll a little bit into the public school education. Right now, the recent VPR poll showed that about half the parents think we should open school and half the state thinks we shouldn't. I know none of you are right in the education world from a teacher or principal perspective, but many of you may be parents or grandparents, and obviously you have employees or folks that are affiliated with you that you know need to have some kind of balance there of how do you juggle kids and your job. So how are across the board Rutland County residents, how are you reacting to school openings? I think I just read that Mill River District down in the area is going to go completely online, the first district in the state to say that. So what are the resources needed to ensure all students have access to quality education? Because if they're not going to be in person, it's about broadband and it's about screens. If it's going to be in person, it might be about touchless faucets and better HVAC systems and just more guidance for schools on coronavirus. What, teachers aren't epidemiologists and health experts. So not sure who would want to jump in first on that one, but
So
yeah, go ahead, Jeff.
We have 2 kids, one because we're in Killington, they go to Woodstock. One's going into middle school, the other one's going to high school. As a small business, my wife and I do a bulk of the work, obviously. At this point, we're overselling weddings for next year. We're starting earlier than we ever have, and we're going later because we're going to try to play catch up, right? She's trying to plan and coordinate, 19 weddings for next season, and she's going to have kids home multiple days a week. And it requires her to be on them consistently, and screen time is already a battle in most homes, I think, throughout the world. And now they have a computer in front of them and you don't know what they're clicking on, playing games instead, all that kind of stuff. So, we learned, our kids actually did really well, with the distance learning at the end of the school year last year, but it required a full-time parent basically playing teacher, enforcer, you know, to make sure that work was actually getting done.
Yeah.
So it's going to be really difficult to try to operate and to do that because we're assuming the role of the public health system at this point.
I'd like to make a comment on
Sure.
my grandmother, but not only that, my son, his wife, and 2 kids live with us. And luckily our house is spread out enough that it's been working, but we're all going nuts with the kids home from school, including and especially the kids. So they really, really want to go back to school, and we'd love to have them go back to school. On the other hand, you know, the school building in Middletown Springs, it was built in 1906. And I don't know what they're going to do about a decent kind of, you know, air conditioning system or whatever. So what we've decided we're going to have to do is my husband and I are going to have to be completely isolated from the kids if the school does reopen as they're planning to, because, you know, we're older and we're vulnerable. And so it's kind of heartbreaking to be in this dilemma. It's heartbreaking for us. It's heartbreaking for the kids. It's heartbreaking for the community. I don't know. I mean, I really don't. As I say, the kids want to go back to school. We'd love to have them in school. But at the same time, I'm just not convinced that it's safe. I'm really not.
Yeah.
So there you go.
I just want to say that some of the frustrations I've heard from teachers and parents around Rutland County have been regarding the standards that the education department is setting, and the sort of, I understand that they want flexibility for districts, but we're looking for some consistency on what is expected, because it's not clear. Some districts are doing one thing and others are, you know, doing the other. You have the choice of either online or hybrid or face-to-face, and people are frustrated that, you know, the one district is doing hybrid, say, and the district right next door is doing full online. Which is it? Which is the safest? We don't have the answers to it, but I hope that we can come to some solution as far as making it a little more consistent so that parents, teachers, students can all plan.
Well, and I think from our perspective too, one of the challenges we saw right off the bat when the kids got shut down, and Dan and I both sit on the Slate Valley Supervisory Union on a team with them. And Kim early had mentioned the mental health and lack of the isolation. So the Project Vision and the Mentor Connector came up with a project to get activities out to the kids initially every week and then every other week. But we're really concerned that if we do end up having this other spike, these kids are having social and mental health challenges because of the isolation. And let's face it, none of us are kids anymore. So no matter what, they're not going to relate to us. It's just real. So we're trying to figure out, as a social service agency network and in partnership with the police departments, how do we do some creative activity, pop-up stuff for the kids so that we can safely get them together, but do it in a way that they're also building relationships with people in their community that might be outside their school system at this point in time. So we have to get really creative on how we can work with these children. And the boxes have been phenomenal opportunity for the kids in our community. And I can't speak enough about that creativity of how do we connect with kids in a unique and different way.
Wow, that rolls pretty well into somewhat the last topic, which is around families and social service needs. And Caprice, you opened us with some of that from the perspective on United Way. And I'm going to probably go with you first, but around the topic of people being worried around housing. They're worried about heating costs in the winter. There's a massive spike in folks who are food insecure. We saw that with demand from our farm this spring when the store shelves were emptying off. But now it's about even just dollars to buy food. We've got an incredible shortage in childcare facilities. We were just talking about education, which is both for the kids, but it's also for the parents of the kids to have their kids being taken care of during the day. And then there's increased, we're starting to hear about increased issues of abuse. And in many respects, there may be higher rates of abuse because there isn't that separation and distance at times, or the ability for a lot of our schools to be the ones that report on some of these things. So it's out there, but it might not be being reported. So Caprice, I'm going to ask you first. What do you see as the greatest needs in Rutland County? And what do we do to ensure the well-being of folks in Rutland County, which is, similar, I think, in that way to a lot of the rest of the state?
I think the one subject we haven't touched on that I do want to make sure we get out there is that the other area that we're seeing a huge increase in is substance use overdoses. And I think that our Turning Point is doing a fabulous job meeting with folks at the hotels every week. But there's an isolation challenge there too. So I think we need to get creative in our community about how do we get our services more remote. We've started it with COVID, we've begun to do virtual meetings, but we need to get more deep on that. And as far as for the social service agencies, food and utility and housing insecurities, absolutely United Way. Actually, I just had a conversation with one of my bosses this morning about, how do we shift potentially this fall and be preemptive about fuel, gift cards to GMP. Like we need to be creative where someone may not have the ability to get to an agency. We need to have a really quick way to be able to get resources to these families without necessarily having to go through all the hoops and things that they might normally need to. We need to be more flexible.
Wow. Any other thoughts down there about what do you see as those needs, Josh, from a business perspective?
I mean, so just from like knowing that there's normally 20 different employees from different companies here on a wedding weekend, the enhanced unemployment that's run out, right? There's a lot of people in the catering world that make a ton of money over the summer and they use that to get to ski season, right? And to have that, go away as of a week ago and not knowing when they're going to return to work because restaurants are not hiring back at the levels they're at. House cleaners are not getting hired back at that point. The enhanced unemployment would give a lot of these people a lot more, encouragement that they can take care of their bills and all that kind of stuff. I think that's a huge part of people's overall wellness.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Other thoughts about the needs down there? Kim, what are you hearing?
My head instantly goes to childcare. I don't have children, but I'm at that age where a lot of my friends have young kids. They're starting out in their career and, completely unable to find childcare. And this was a huge issue before COVID. There was not enough high quality and affordable childcare in Rutland County and throughout Vermont. And without childcare, our parents can't go back to work. The domino effect is just never ending with the lack of childcare. So, instantly that's where my head goes. And, I feel for the parents and I think that there needs to be made some serious adjustments here.
Yeah, we need money for childcare. We need funding for our state colleges, and we need funding for those who are unemployed. It's a very difficult situation out there. And I'm watching Washington not really getting it done here down this home stretch with those enhanced unemployment benefits that Josh talked about. It's frustrating for sure. I know our congressional delegation is doing all they can, and there's a bit of a roadblock for those that in Washington that don't seem to want to spend more money on these critical needs when they could easily find money a few years ago for very exorbitant tax breaks for the richest that was supposed to trickle down. So there's my political commentary for the moment, but I just really want to thank you all. You've touched on so many of the things that I've been hearing as Lieutenant Governor that are issues all over the state. They are more issues than unfortunately I think we can solve. I heard the word creativity a number of times, which if we can see $1 of state money be spent 2 or 3 times around on a few things, I know there's efforts to find those ways with things like Everybody Eats, which was money to a restaurant to pay their employees and to buy food locally to then feed hungry, but it's still just a drop in the bucket. So I really do want to thank you all. Thank you for the time that you've given. I know you're scrambling in your day-to-day lives to juggle everything you're trying to accomplish in the world of COVID, and the ways you're helping each other in the local community. I think folks are really pitching in and helping neighbors. So thank you all on that. And I'm going to do my little wrap paragraph here, and then we'll close it up.
I need to.
What's that? Yep, Judy's got to go. So I host these regular conversations here on issues that the legislature is addressing and working on that Vermonters have brought up. You can visit the events page on my website, zuckermanforvt.com, for many of those past episodes. Sometimes we've gone deeper into education or employers or aspects of the CARES Act money and so forth. You can also look at for future conversations we're going to host by going to that website. We have recordings and videos of those past conversations, not only on the website around CARES Act, schools reopening, women in politics, healthcare programs, so many different issues. You can also find those on my YouTube page at Zuckerman for VT. And then I'm just going to wrap by saying, if you have additional thoughts, topics you think we should go into deeper detail on, questions or ideas, please email to info@zuckermanforvt.com, and we will work to include those in future episodes. Just going to say, I encourage folks to vote, no matter who you're voting for. Please participate. If you have not mailed in your ballot, but you have a mail-in ballot, it's best to now bring it into your town clerk, because if you put it in the postal service, it may not get in on time. And if you haven't voted or you didn't get an early ballot, you can still vote in person, both at your town clerk if they're open today or Monday. Some are open on Saturday. And certainly on election day, you can still go vote. You can either bring your ballot if you have one, or you can, of course, register and vote same day here in Vermont. And if you're registered, you can go vote on election day. Thank you all for tuning in. Again, thank you. Who do I have left? I've got Caprice, Senator Hooker, Josh, and Kim. Thank you all so much for joining us today. I appreciate it.
Thank you, David.